Hey, this is Kurt Cortain, and in this week's edition of Forerunners, the Surfline podcast, I'm joined by forecaster Rob Midsteifer to discuss a system in the Northwest Atlantic that will produce days of surf for select zones along the East Coast. That isn't the only system we're watching, as a storm moving through the Great Lakes will set up rather significant southerly swell for the end of April into the beginning of May. If you aren't already a premium member and would like to give us a try, which we would greatly appreciate, go to surfline.com/Forerunners podcast for a free 15-day trial of Surfline Premium. All right, here we go.
Okay, this is Sean Collins, Chief Forecaster of Surfline, and this is, the first order of business looking down on the Southern Hemisphere, what to expect over the next 2 weeks.
At any given moment, a perfect wave is breaking somewhere on this earth. For the surfer, the trick has always been knowing where and when to find it.
All right, welcome, Rob. I saw you get some good waves today. We have fun waves here on the Outer Banks, so let's get into why that occurred and what we can expect not only here, but for the rest of the East Coast and Caribbean as we head over the next couple of days.
Yeah, Kurt, geez, that was a fun morning, not gonna lie. Kind of our bread and butter type of swell here on the Outer Banks, and I'll get into what that means, what happened, what we got going over the next few days. But just this morning, I don't know about you, I woke up, was forecasting, I believe, wasted chest, fair to good here on the Northern Outer Banks. And one of the first things I do when I wake up, and I know I'm on surf report, so this was around I think my alarm was 6 a.m., 6:05, somewhere in there. Woke up, looked at the buoy observations, and I was like, oh yeah, it's on. I saw that outer duck, the buoy, one of the better buoys that's right here in the Northern Outer Banks, I was reading about 4 feet at 9 seconds when I woke up out of the east-northeast, which is pretty perfect. And what happened, we saw an area of low pressure kind of slide pretty slowly off New England over the last few days. And that system, when we see systems move off New England into the Northwest Atlantic, that always triggers kind of my stoke in a way, because if you get those systems to move far enough south off New England and dig under the Canadian Maritimes and move far enough south under, say, Nova Scotia or Newfoundland, you get that northeast fetch kind of tucked up way up there in the Northwest Atlantic. And when we see those kind of fetches develop like we saw over the last few days, really a large pocket of 30 knots, even some smaller pockets to 40 knots aimed directly back at the East Coast. So we saw that, I believe it was Monday, I saw that occur. And then yesterday, Tuesday, we saw that swell move through some of the buoys, including Georges Bank, Nantucket buoy. Those are pretty good indicator buoys for us here in the Northern Outer Banks. But yeah, we saw mid-period northeast swell build in last night, and it reached us here this morning. Really fun, kind of waist to chest high, some bigger sets on occasion. And that 9 to 10 second swell interval is really good for us, as well as the east-northeast direction. But that kind of mid-period swell is really our bread and butter. Our sandbars really like it. When we get a little bit more longer period, we can deal with some closeouts or some kind of weird outer bar stuff going on. And then once you get down to, say, 7 or 6 seconds, which we've actually had a lot of swell that's really short period lately, that can kind of feel pretty weak and just doesn't really have the punch to it. So getting somewhere in between that really short period and the too long period, that's really that 9-second zone. And honestly, if I had to kind of craft up a swell in my dreams, it would kind of be around 4 feet at 9 seconds, which is exactly what we saw today. So yeah, great stuff out there today. Kurt, I know you wish you were a goofy foot, but all those south swells we sometimes get, I'm jealous of the regular footers. So yeah, that's pretty much the gist of what we saw this morning.
Yeah, I was glad that I could entertain you. I had that one where I kind of pulled back a little bit and went over the falls. So you really enjoyed that one, didn't you?
All my friends saw you and we cracked up. So yeah, not going to let that one slide.
Yeah, that was not my finest moment, but my day will come. The south swells are going to come. It's interesting. So, we talked about the swell that's impacting us today. It's a really cool situation because you're able to get those observations and actually, we can kind of get down to the moment of when these swells are going to fill in. And, a lot of times with us on the East Coast, you're forecasting winds and waves that haven't occurred yet that you're going to surf that next day, So anytime we can get a system like this that we can really dig into the data and figure out how the surf's going to be. I know, this swell is outperforming the models, something that we frequently see with this type of scenario. So I know you went a little bit above the guidance, and that was obviously verified pretty well today. So great job on the forecast. And it does look like we're going to continue to see a little bit of that swell, not only for us here, but also some other locations along the East Coast in the next couple of days, right?
Absolutely, Kurt. That storm's actually still out there spinning. It's starting to weaken and kind of move further east away from the East Coast, which, when we have those weakening systems starting to get further away, we really don't ideally like that. However, we still have a nice pocket of winds aimed at us today. And what that means, given, 1 to 2 days of travel time, even a little bit more as the system moves further away, we still have at least 3 days of this swell. Really for here in the Outer Banks, and then move down to Florida because the swell has to travel a little bit further to get down there. We're looking at some surf even into the weekend from this same system. It's interesting. We saw that swell build in on some of the, say, like the Barnegat buoy off of New Jersey yesterday, started to pulse in, and that's when I knew, all right, like it's game on tomorrow, which is now today. But interesting stuff.
Yeah, there's a couple of breaks down in Florida that I think will be standouts during this swell. Mike Watson, our Florida man, is down there issuing the forecast. So be sure to check out what he is expecting. I was chatting with him yesterday, and that same swell is going to propagate down that way. Obviously, you lose a little bit of the punch because it's traveling a little bit further. You have a little more decay. But there are some spots that really like those northeast swells and those mid period ones. So there should be some fun waves around. So check your forecast for details on that, and it should be some fun waves in the Sunshine State here later in the week and into the weekend. But further up the coast, we actually had that swell that's going to be in the water, producing rideable waves for many spots and even fun waves for some spots. But I think the big story is actually the next system that is going to be impacting us and giving me some rights.
Yeah, you're right, Kurt. So mixing in, so we kind of have two players, so to speak, right now. That previous system I just mentioned is going to keep some swell in the water for the next few days. Nothing huge, nothing quite to the caliber we're going to see from this next system, at least, say from in the Northeast, looking pretty solid over the late week time frame. So basically, we have a system that's currently kind of tracking into the Great Lakes region in tandem. In tandem with that, we have a high pressure system that's kind of skirting off the East Coast now. And ahead of that system, we're going to have some developing kind of east, southeast to southeast winds off the mid-Atlantic region over the rest of today and into tomorrow. And really, we're going to see winds really crank up here on the Outer Banks tomorrow out of the south-southeast direction. So what that means, we got a south swell coming. And it's interesting when we get these south swells that mix in with the east to east-northeast swells from the previous system, this can actually be really good. It can kind of do a couple things. One, it'll kind of cross up the swell lines. So if you're looking for more peaky surf, this could be a good opportunity. It also, when you have the opposing swell directions, can knock down on the current. And I know here on the Outer Banks, and when I used to live in New Jersey, this was an issue. A strong south swell means you're just drifting up the beach, and sometimes it's kind of hard to be in position. But the good thing about this type of combo swell is that can kind of knock down that current. So let's get into the little bit more of details, what we got going on. So really, what we're talking about Thursday, tomorrow, not a lot of good conditions up and down the East Coast. It looks like potentially some improving conditions down in the Southeast. But it's interesting to note that if you were looking at the forecast earlier in the week, the timing of this system has been trending a little bit slower, which basically means, earlier in the week, we were looking at Thursday, maybe Friday, depending on your location. But now it's shifted about a day behind. So depending on your location, you want to keep an eye on Friday into Saturday, say for the Northeast down into the Outer Banks. So Kurt, if you're a surfer up in New Jersey, like what kind of is your bread and butter type of swell?
What would I be looking for?
Yeah. What's kind of your
south?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, south.
So this south is going to be pretty strong. I believe really from the Outer Banks northward, we're looking at a lot of head to overhead surf as the swell peaks. In a perfect world, we'd see widespread good conditions during the peak of this swell, but that's not going to happen. And this storm is a little interesting. So basically, we have that previous system I mentioned moving really pretty slowly out over the Atlantic. And when we have these kind of, it's not fully a stalled system, it's just kind of a slow mover. That kind of ends up jamming up the river, so to speak, if you think of the atmosphere as a river. So when one system moves kind of slow, there's a good chance the one behind it's going to move kind of slow. And that's what we're going to see heading into the rest of this week and weekend with the system's cold front sweeping through the East Coast. And it's going to kind of move through, depending on your location, Thursday night into Friday, even Friday night for New England up there. But the issue is that we're not going to see a kind of a clean cold front passage. And what I mean by that, if I'm going to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty meteorological details, the system's going to end up becoming occluded. And what that means is basically the cold front kind of reaches the warm front with that system, and it kind of gets vertically, if you think vertically in the atmosphere, it kind of becomes unstacked. And that the center of the low kind of moves a little bit slower than the cold front. And when that happens, we don't normally see a clean wind shift as that front happens. So basically what that means for a place like New Jersey, Friday looks a little bit dicey. If you're a surfer up there or even in New England, a lot of times we'll see south winds ahead of a cold front. As soon as that front passes, the winds will shift west or even northwest. Well, on this one, the winds are going to shift more southwest. And that's kind of the unique thing about this system, where it's not going to be a textbook scenario where it, say, cleans up throughout the whole mid-Atlantic, or you see widespread good surf in a place like Rhode Island. It's going to be kind of hit or miss, and you're going to have to use some local knowledge on where to target for best winds and conditions. And of course, check out that forecast on the site to help you dial that in. But as that cold front kind of sweeps through, Friday looks like, it's going to be pretty strong. Surf's going to be pretty strong really everywhere from the Outer Banks northward. Like I said, head high to overhead range for a lot of places, but only really key zones are really going to turn on. That being said, Saturday looks like we'll finally see that low kind of shift off the coast. We'll see high pressure build in, and that means more widespread favorable winds. Of course, the swell will be starting to, fade out by that point. But the good news is that this system is looking pretty strong, and the fetch is going to be extending, well past Bermuda, which is about a day and a half to even sometimes 2 days for the kind of lingering swell to kind of reach you if you're up in the Northeast. So yeah, Saturday looks really fun in a lot of places. So definitely keep an eye on that. There's a caveat there, of course. If your local beach is open and you can access it safely, then definitely keep an eye on that Saturday time frame.
Yeah, I think you hit on some interesting points. One thing I wanted to circle back on is, as it became clear that our timing of this system was pushed back a little bit. I've always thought of it as it kind of shuts down the window of one day. So our Thursday may not look as good as it was looking, 5 days ago or whatever. But now it means there'll be more size left by Friday. Definitely. If that makes sense, because everything's kind of shifted back a little bit. And, as you said, the length of this fetch and the strength of it, it's going to be, a little bit of it's going to be a multi-day event. It's not going to be a one and done. It's not going to, clean up and drop immediately. And that combined with the lingering swell from the Northwest Atlantic low should set up, some fun surf for us later this week and into the weekend. So the first couple of days of May should start off pretty good. So it's nice to see. Hopefully this kind of pattern where we've been getting waves continues as we head further into May. But again, as you said, the one caveat here is we continue to need to social distance, and it's relatively easy. We can spread out, find your own sandbar relatively, but I know there's some other spots that it's can get a little bit more crowded. So just be aware of that and follow the guidelines from your local government and health officials, and just be smart, I guess, is kind of the simple way to put it.
Absolutely. The one thing that, going back to what I mentioned about the whole combo swell, that does tend to open up more options as far as spots go. That's definitely what I've seen over the years. When, say, you have one swell, say there's a south swell in New Jersey, there's going to be some spots that are significantly better than others. And of course, those better spots are more likely to get crowded. However, when you have that other swell mixing in, it tends to kind of break up, say one defined, say there's one groin that is really just having really good rights, just peel off it. In a case where you have a little bit of a combo swell, it's less likely you're just going to have to sit on one spot, and there's just going to be more opportunity, which is definitely good from a crowding standpoint.
Gotcha. So is there anything else that's interesting about that, or anything that we have further down the pipeline that we should be monitoring, or what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, next week, I believe I touched on this earlier, but man, we've really had an active pattern over the East Coast and Western Atlantic over the last, really all of April, even moving into late March. Just a lot of systems moving through and sending us waves. I know some of my friends and I, we've just been talking about how much we've been surfing lately, which is, I feel really fortunate I can say that here in the Outer Banks, being just so geographically isolated. But next week, yeah, looks like we're going to have another system move through around Monday. There's some subtle differences amongst the models there, so I'll be dialing that in on the forecast over the next few days. It looks like more of a northeast U.S. type of swell. Like, this system just doesn't look that strong. It's going to be moving pretty quick, so more of a selective pulse from the whole East Coast standpoint. And then really the mid to late next week too, we could have another system or even pair of systems. So the overall trend of our active pattern, it looks like it's going to hold. And, when we are moving into May, and, a lot of East Coasters know once we get into June and even, midsummer, pattern is pretty much never active unless you start getting the tropics to warm up. But realistically, if you can access your beach safely and it's open, you definitely want to take advantage of the waves over the rest of this week, the weekend, and even next week likely too.
Gotcha. Sounds good. Yeah, as we get further into May, and obviously the hurricane season officially starts June 1st. So we'll be kind of shifting gears a little bit from the frontal activity that's delivering our waves to more of those summertime type swells, and maybe a good southern hemi or two. Always fun to get one of those.
Yeah, man, we have had actually some interesting activity down in the South Atlantic, and if you're not familiar with this, the East Coast actually does get swell from the South Atlantic. If you're listening and you're from the West Coast, you're well aware that the South Pacific provides a lot of surf throughout the summer months, at least the Northern Hemisphere southern months, because it's actually winter down in the Southern Hemisphere when the storm track's really active. But if you get the right setup in the South Atlantic, kind of in the vicinity off South Africa, say a storm that kind of pushes towards Namibia, you can get a really lully, of course, because these swells travel, like 5,000-6,000 miles, maybe even a little bit more. But the long period nature kind of conserves the swell. And, here in the Outer Banks, we've surfed plenty of fun size, albeit very lully, but fun size southern hemi swells. And I know they have to be pretty significant to really be fun in the places that aren't the Outer Banks, where we're kind of a swell magnet, so to speak. But yeah, it's been active down in the South Atlantic. Nothing coming to us that's really robust yet, but that's a good sign for the rest of the season.
Yeah, we'll take what we can get in the summer months, that's for sure. But sounds good, Rob. Thanks for joining us, and excited about this run of waves we're having, and hopefully everybody out there stay safe and get some waves if you're able to.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Forerunners, the Surfline podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Just hit the red button below over the Surfline logo in the bottom right and let us know what you think in the comments below. We may even answer back in a future podcast. If you aren't already a member, just click on the icon on the bottom left for a free 15-day trial of Surfline Premium. Be safe, be good to each other, and we'll chat again next week.